is a cultural revolution going on, and it's happening naturally. You see, you can't continue to put your foot on people's necks and not expect them to try to break your leg. And that's what's happening right now. We're at that point. We're getting ready to break this guy's leg, whatever way we can. But he's got to get his foot off our necks, and we need to come together. He forces us to come together. Many of us would like to chill and just, eat popcorn and go to a movie or laugh and joke and have a good time. But we are dealing with a person who is disgruntled. He is underdeveloped, and he's to be honest, he's very immature. Yes. Because people who have always loved him better than he's been able to love himself, he has disdain for. And that's crazy, because we have never really brought him any grief. We've only brought him joy. But he doesn't understand that that's what we're here to do. Even in chains, we still brought America the greatest humanity they've ever seen. And we still bring it. So now we have to look out for ourselves, unplug all of our sockets, take all of our stuff and start plugging into each other.
Me and Biggie be sitting down, we got some ideas that we got a program we want to bring to the people, man. We want to talk about building business in the black community. We want to talk teaching black studies. He had this whole thing he's laying out to me, right? Then he says, but the biggest piece in order to finance all of this, we got to get control of the distribution of the rap music. And I said, do you understand that you're going up against the mafia, both the Jewish mafia and the Italian mafia? I said, yeah, we do. He said, it ain't just me and Big. He said, we got a lot of other young brothers that's coming in, and we got more brothers coming in. He was dead within 48 hours of that company.
Security because you a hoe, nigga. You gotta move around security. Real street niggas don't move security, nigga. You a bitch. You gon' die, nigga. You gon' die.
I'm proud of my heritage. I'm from in the South, and I just so happen to be gay.
Oh, okay. So you're gay, Southern pride, Trump supporter.
In terms of the way hip-hop has been bastardized and the way it's been turned to push certain agendas, the most obvious one in recent years has been the feminization of men. So if you think back to when I was coming up in the hip-hop game in the 90s and just getting into that music and starting to play it on the radio and playing it in clubs, it was very, very rare to find a gay rapper. And I remember in 1999, there was this phenomenon of the gay rapper. There was like this rumor going around the industry that a certain high-profile rapper was gay, because back in the late 90s, that was a major event, because hip-hop was so kind of macho, masculine, that anyone that came out as gay in that industry was ridiculed and was kind of laughed out of the game, rightly or wrongly. I'm not saying that was a correct approach, but look at how things have changed now, due to social engineering, due to that slow drip effect of changing people's attitudes, changing people's perceptions. Now, it's no big deal at all to have gay rappers. And actually, you have many prominent hip-hop artists who are getting pictured wearing dresses, getting pictured wearing women's clothing. They're very feminine in that they're wearing rainbow colors, they're wearing makeup, eyeshadow, all of this. And nobody thinks this is unusual anymore. Nobody's got any kind of objection to this. And it just speaks to how social engineering gets done over the years, and people's attitudes get slowly changed. And the feminization of men has become a very serious problem in society now, because if you look at the way this COVID stunt has been pulled off, if the architects of this narrative had tried this one 30 or 40 years ago, I feel that they would have encountered a lot of resistance from armies of real men, militias of masculine men stepping into their true nature and rising up and rebelling against the tyranny that's been dropped on the people, representing the interests of the community at whole, coming together and providing some pushback to what was being done to us.
And all these kidnaps and all these murders and all these jailings, the beat goes on. And it goes on strong. I know that. I said it before I went to jail. I'm back now and I may be going again. But if I do go, if you don't say anything else, then the last thing I heard him say was that you can jail a revolutionary, but you can't jail a revolutionary.
I think everyone that was in the Black Panther Party kind of understood it was a given that we would have wiretaps, that we would be followed, that we would be harassed, we'd be locked up, that we would even be beaten by the police.
In the winter of 1969, law enforcement agencies launched efforts to undermine an attempted coalition between the Black Panther Party and the Blackstone Rangers, a Chicago gang.
The Panthers were pursuing an ideology that said we need to take these young minds, this young energy, and turn it into part of our movement in terms of black liberation and the rest of it. And I saw a very purposeful, intentional effort on the part of the police department to keep that head from hooking up to that body. It was like, you know, do not let this thing become a part of what could ultimately be a political movement, because that's exactly what it was.
Traveling recently through Africa and the Middle East, in every country that you go to, usually the degree of progress can never be separated from the woman. If you're in a country that's progressive, the woman is progressive. If you're in a country that reflects a consciousness toward the importance of education, it's because the woman is aware of the importance of education. But in every backward country, you'll find the women are backward. And in every country where education is not stressed, it's because the women don't have education. So one of the things I became thoroughly convinced of in my recent travels is the importance of giving freedom to the woman, giving her education, and giving her the incentive to get out there and put that same spirit.
Don't expect people who came to invade us to write the truth about us. They will always write negative things about us. And they have to do that because they have to justify their invasion. We don't write our history. It has always been handed down to us orally by our elders. Of course, the white man came and he writes history. In fact, you don't know anything about any place until the white man gets there. Until the white man comes to any place, nothing lives. It's only when he comes and says, "Boof, I've discovered you, now you exist," which is ridiculous.
The Aborigines were deemed to be subhuman, little more than animals, which was to justify not only the theft of their land, but their extermination. An edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, still in circulation when I was at school, described them as only an animal of prey, more ferocious than the leopard or the hyena. He devours his own species. So they were hunted and raped and massacred. And few doubted at the time that genocide was official policy. A government report in the 1850s spoke of the success of poisoning Aborigines, 100 of them laid out at a time. But until quite recently, little of this was even acknowledged. In Tasmania, the Aborigines were said to have died out. In fact, they were hunted along with kangaroos and almost wiped out. In New South Wales, by 1845, the tribe who had watched Captain Cook sail here into Botany Bay was reduced to 3 women and a man. In Victoria, an Aborigine called old Mr. Burt recalled this story told by his mother.
They buried our babies with only their heads above the ground. All in a row they were. Then they had a test to see who could kick the babies' heads off the furthest. One man clobbered a baby's head off from horseback. They then spent most of the day raping the women. Most of them were then tortured to death by sticking sharp things like spears up their vaginas until they died. They tied the men's hands behind their backs, then cut off their penis and testicles, and watched them run around screaming until they died.
And you're saying, I'm assuming, that history is being manipulated for an end.
In itself.
In itself.
History, the Europeans began to manipulate history when they rose and began to expand into the broader world in the 15th and the 16th century, because they had to justify the slave trade and they had to justify the colonial system that followed. And modern racism has its incubation in that period.
Buckwheat, did you say Spanky was in a lot of trouble? Yes, sir.
The gag here is that the gang doesn't realize that that's Spanky in blackface until they actually see Buckwheat.
Hiya, Buckwheat. Hiya, Buckwheat.
So the gist of it is that You put blackface makeup on anyone and they become black.
And that's supposed to be hilarious.
And it's supposed to be really funny.
When he grows up.
And it goes on. During the golden age of the Hollywood musical,
you cannot enslave a man and say he's a human being, that he has humanity, and that he was one of the forerunners of the world's religion. You cannot enslave an African and say this about him, because if you say he's a human being, then you're saying he's an extension of you. Then you cannot sell an African Christianity and call him a heathen and acknowledge the African contribution toward the creation of Christianity. So it's a contradiction in acknowledging that the man created Christianity, then come back and say that you are selling him Christianity because he is a heathen. So the European had to literally strip history of the contributions of non-European people.
Some slaveholders imagined that capturing and enslaving Africans was for their benefit, that they were exposing them to Christianity, that slavery was a school for civilization.
Some actually looked at it as it was their chance to be missionaries, even though they bought and were using these people.
Most folk who defended slavery were justifying it on the grounds of Christianity, and they pulled from the Protestant faith and also from the Catholic faith, using the Bible verse, "Slave, obey your masters." If you are obedient to your masters and your mistresses, there is a reward in heaven for the kind of work that you do.
From the 1830s onward, Southern politicians began to construct an argument that slavery truly was ordained by God and would give birth to the best of all possible societies.
Southerners didn't understand why they needed to justify something that had happened since time began.
And when it comes to the history of slavery in America, some may feel as though slavery was abolished in 1865, when it was merely upgraded and transitioned into what it is known today as, which is employment. The industrialized version of what President Woodrow Wilson and his administration, along with multiple other co-conspirators like Henry Ford, J.P. Morgan, Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and the University of Chicago, just to name a few, created and enacted into law for the benefit of 1% of the people. And their social engineering experiment also included control over things that would affect one's mindset, controlling what is known as American history, religion, science, social media, and public education.
The market value of slaves in 1860 was greater than the market value of every railroad, factory, and bank combined. Follow the money, because the money we're talking about was huge.
And you can tell it's real because it looks so fake, honestly. And you can tell it's real because it looks so fake, honestly.
In the very, very beginning, if you want to go all the way back, people would bring their gold or silver to the banks for safekeeping. And they say, give us a paper receipt. And we don't want to guard our silver and our gold because, people could come in the middle of the night and they could kill us or tie us up and threaten us, and they'll get our gold and silver, so we can't really guard it. We'll take it to the bank and have them guard it, and we just want a paper receipt so that we can take the receipt back and get our gold anytime we want. And so in the beginning, money was receipt money. They could then, instead of changing or exchanging the gold coins, they could exchange the receipts, and people would accept the receipts just as well as the gold, knowing they could get the gold. And so these paper receipts being circulated were, in essence, the very first examples of paper money. Well, the banks learned early on that game that here they were sitting on this pile of gold and all these paper receipts out there. People weren't bringing the receipts in anymore. Very few of them, maybe 5%, maybe 7% of the people would bring in their paper receipts and ask for the gold. So they said, why don't we just sort of give more receipts out than we have gold? They'll never know because we only are asked at the best, 7% of it, so we can create more receipts for gold than we have, and we can collect interest on that because we'll loan that into the economy and we'll charge interest on this money that we don't really have. And it's a pretty good gimmick, don't you think? And they, well, yeah, of course. And so that's how fractional reserve banking started, and now it's institutionalized, and they teach it in school. No one ever questions the integrity of it or the ethics of it. They say, well, that's the way banking works, and isn't it wonderful?
Think about the role of slaves and trade and slave labor in the economy. And that's a statistic that shocks me, because the Mississippi Valley today is one of the poorest places in America. And in 1860, more millionaires per capita than any other place in the country. And that was because of slavery.
Founding fathers set this up. They were brilliant men, and I have great respect for them. They were brilliant. But they didn't set this up for us. When they said we the people, they didn't mean we us people, did they? No. When they said we the people, they didn't mean we Hispanics, we Native American, we Arab, we Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Indian. They didn't set this country up for no dark people. This country was set up by the people, for the people, by the rich white people, for the rich white people, and poor people can go to hell.
I don't think you will ever change and write books that incorporate white lives into them substantially.
I have done.
In a substantial way.
You can't understand how powerfully racist that question is, can you? Because you could never ask a white author, when are you going to write about black people? Whether he did or not, or she did or not. Even the inquiry comes from a position of being in the center.
And being used to being in the center.
And being used to being in the center. And saying, you know, is it ever possible that you will enter the mainstream? It's inconceivable that where I already am is the mainstream.
Oh, no, that wasn't the implication of my question. I think you are very, very much in the mainstream. It's a question of the subject of your narrative, whether you want to alter the parameters of it, whether you see any benefit in doing that, or will you clearly see disadvantages in doing it from your own point of view?
Artistic disadvantages. There are no pluses for me. Being an African-American writer is sort of like being a Russian writer who writes about Russia, in Russian, for Russians. And the fact that it gets translated and read by other people is a benefit. It's a plus. But he's not obliged to ever consider writing about French people or Americans or anybody.
There are many white people who mean right and in heart want to do right, but there are so few. If 10,000 rattlesnakes was coming down that aisle now, and I had a door here I could shut, and in that 10,000, 1,000 voice of low last suspected, and I'm going to look at 2 or 3 white people who are trying to do right and don't.
What I want to do, like I said before, is I want to clear up some stuff between the relationship of the Greeks and the Camites or the Egyptians, now that we have proven that they are black. The Greeks. You see, they were a Phoenician culture. And the Phoenicians was nothing but a branch of pre-dynastic Egyptians. You see, pre-dynastic Egyptians. Now, in this relationship, the reason why several doctrines had to be handed over to the Greeks is because they understood one thing. They understood that hieroglyphics of Metanetta was going to be a dead language for close to 2,000 years.
Well, Sheikh Anta Diop teaches us about the sun people and the ice people. So what gave them the momentum is psychological disposition that came out of that ice age. So for sun people, African people, what was their psychological disposition? Living in the warmth, very little clothing, could just go outside and pick a fruit, as Dr. Ben would say, because there was this abundance. Whereas for ice people living in the caves, in hills, through the ice age, developing that disposition, the first thing they had to go out and do is kill.
As it relates to domination on a physical level, as it relates to torture, murder, mayhem, as it pertains to a society that has no order and arrangement, then they would have some form. If you look at the word dominance, they would have the word dominance. The question is, as it relates to honor, integrity, and dignity, is that the type of dominance that you want? If you want to create the type of society that inbred is about to implode on itself because of the nature of the conditions you've put on people, then you would have to use the word dominant. And I would use the word dominant. But if you're looking for the society that I believe is balanced within the forces of nature, then they are not dominant. In fact, they are inferior to the fact, because eventually nature is going to take back what they attempted to steal. You cannot cancel the future. You can only postpone it.
10 o'clock Eastern Time this morning, just collapsing on itself.
The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed.
We have no idea what caused this.
Almost looks like one of those planned implosions.
As if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself and it is not there anymore.
If you wish to bring anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
We heard another explosion, and I'm assuming that's the one that came from the lower level, since there were two. And I said,
right, because it was like 18 minutes apart.
Well, this is the first explosion, and there was a second explosion in the same building. There were two explosions.
Okay. Federal agencies that were down there do believe that there was some sort of explosive device somewhere else besides the planes hitting.
NBC's Pat Dawson is close to the scene of that attack. Pat?
Just moments ago, I spoke to the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department. Chief Albert Turry, he received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. He tried to get his men out as quickly as he could, but he said that there was another explosion which took place. And then an hour after the first hit here, with the first crash that took place, he said, there was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. He thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. The second device, he speculates, was probably planted in the building.
There were 2 or 3 similar huge explosions, and the building literally shook. You literally shook at the base of this building.
First one and then the other, some say after secondary explosions.
A big explosion happened. All of a sudden the elevator blew up, smoke. I dragged the guy out, his skin was hanging off, and I dragged him out and I helped him out of to the ambulance.
Just get out of the tunnel and it blew.
The subway tunnel?
Yeah.
Collapsed.
5 blocks from the World Trade Center. And we were standing here when there was some sort of collapse or explosion. Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse? To me, it sounded like an explosion.
When I try to save people, in the moment we heard a big explosion coming down. Everything just went black. Everything came down, glass started popping. And people got hurt. Stuff went on top of them, and it was a big explosion. Everything got dark, real dark, like snow.
The FBI is here, as you can see. They had roped this area off. They were taking photographs and securing this area just prior to that huge explosion that we all heard and felt.
So this is a video of Bill Gates briefing the CIA. And this video was done on April 13th of 2005. Let's listen together.
Excuse me, on the left over here, we have individuals who are religious fundamentalists, religious fanatics, and this is the expression, RT-PCR, real-time PCR expression of the BMAT2 gene. Over here, we have individuals. So let me complete. So over here, we have individuals who are not particularly fundamentalist, not particularly religious, and you can see there's a much reduced expression of this particular gene, the BMAT2 gene. Another evidence that supports our hypothesis for the development of this approach.
So what you're looking at here is two different graphs. This graph right here on this side in the green shows, it illustrates individuals who are what Bill Gates deems as being religious fanatics. Okay? There's a particular gene that is expressed in individuals, and those that are not religious fanatics, their genes look like this. Okay? So this is a religious fanatic over here in the green. This is a non-religious fanatic. Okay? All right.
The idea here is by spreading this virus, we're going to eliminate individuals from going on a bomb nest and going into a market and blowing up the market.
So our hypothesis is that these are fanatical people, that they have overexpression of the BMAT2 gene, and that by vaccinating them against this, we'll eliminate this behavior. So we have some very, very remarkable data in this next slide. Here we have two brain scans. These are fMRIs. These are two different individuals with different levels of expression of BMAT2. On top is an individual who's a religious fanatic, an individual, and we've repeated this numerous times, that has high levels of BMAT2. Now, this individual down here who had low levels of the BMAT2 gene, this individual would self-describe as not particularly religious. In each case, these individuals were read a religious text. This individual lit up the right middle frontal gyrus, shown here, and that's a part of the brain that's associated with theory of mind. It's a part of the brain that has to do with intents and beliefs and desires. In marked contrast, here's an individual who would not particularly self-describe as religious, and when they're read a religious text, what you see is that this part of the brain called the anterior insula lights up. This is a part of the brain that's associated with disgust or displeasure on hearing something.
So you're suggesting I take a CT scan with me when I'm evaluating people to determine whether I put a bullet in their head?
So the data that I'm presenting here supports the concept that we're proposing, and I think that we would not propose to do CT scans or fMRIs on individuals out in the hinterlands of Afghanistan. The virus would immunize against this VMAT2 gene, and that would have the effect that you see here, which is it's essentially to turn a fanatic into a normal person. And we think that will have major effects in the Middle East.
How would you suggest that this is going to be dispersed in the aerosol?
Well, so the present plan and the tests that we've done so far.
So the CIA agent just asked Bill Gates, how do you propose that we're going to release this virus? By aerosol is what he just said. This is Bill Gates' response. This was actually filmed. This was Bill Gates briefing the CIA April 13th of 2005, for those of you that are just chiming in.
Have used respiratory viruses, such as flu or rhinoviruses, and we believe that that's a satisfactory way to get the exposure of the largest part of the population. Most of us, of course, have been exposed to both of those viruses, and we're quite confident that this will be a very successful approach.
This is fascinating. What's the name of this proposal?
Yeah, so the name of this project is FunVax, which is the vaccine for religious fundamentalism.
And you have a proposal already?
The proposal has just been submitted, And I think that the data that I have shown you today would support the development of this project, and we think it has great promise.
All right, just some questions that keep coming up.
Okay.
Why do I have to keep wearing the mask after I get the vaccine? I thought it was going to protect me from the vaccine. What's the answer?
Well, the answer is, unless you get the overwhelming majority of the country vaccinated and protected and get that umbrella of what we call herd immunity, there's still a lot of virus out there.
There's still a lot of virus out there.
So just because you're protected, so-called protected by the vaccine, you need to remember that you could be prevented from getting clinical disease and still have the virus that is in your nasopharynx because you could get infected. We're not sure at this point that the vaccine protects you against getting infected.
We're not sure at this point that the vaccine protects you against getting infected.
We know for sure it's very, very good, 94, 95% in protecting you against clinically recognizable disease.
Clinically recognizable disease, but not COVID?
And almost 100% in protecting you for severe disease.
And almost 100% from severe disease? Well, then what does he call COVID if that's not serious?
But until you have virus that is so low in society, we as a nation need to continue to wear the mask, to keep the physical distance, to avoid crowds. We're not through with this just because we're starting a vaccine program.
We're not through with this just because we're starting a vaccine program.
Even though you, as an individual, might have gotten vaccinated, it is not over by any means. We still have a long way to go, and we've got to get as many people as possible vaccinated, of all groups.
The biggest fraud against this humanity, our humanity, is the fact that viruses have never been isolated. None. There is no measles virus. And once you understand the basic chemistry and biology of the fraud that they've perpetuated on the human race, and each year, if you ever thought about this, why is there a new virus every year? With a new name? With a similar types of symptomologies? This all started with the Third Reich. And Dr. Enders and the so-called viruses. I write about this in one of my books. A second thought about viruses, vaccines, and the HIV/AIDS hypothesis. And I'm not alone. Those who have been brave enough, who stood up, even Peter Duesberg, Professor Peter Duesberg at the university, a friend of mine, who wrote the book Inventing the AIDS Virus, lost all of his funding at the university. When the Nobel Prize winner for discovering the so-called HIV virus gets exiled to Beijing because he's changing his mind about the existence of a virus.
The only substance on this planet that are electrical are the products that came with creation. Carrots didn't. Beets, rice, beans, wheatgrass, wheat. All these things are hybrid, plus much more. So what we are noticing is that there is gross misinformation when it relates to healing and nutrition. We are eating something that offends our biology. And in offending our biology, it offends our thinking pattern. We are looking outside of ourselves for the answer. Of course we are. We were trained to look outside of ourselves.
So now, here you have allowed these misguided ministers to introduce you to God. and tell you that God is almighty. No, 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 no. God has no power. Only the power that you give it. Going back to what my wife said, God is an abstract idea that needs human spirituality to give it life. Without you giving it life, God don't have no power. So don't be misled by these misguided ministers telling you that. Okay? So this is part of our first step of liberation. See? Now, it's up to you to liberate. I can't liberate you. You have to do this yourself. You know how you do that? You change your mind. You change the thoughts that's floating up here about these various religions. Okay? That's how you liberate yourself. I'm giving you the keys to liberate yourself. And you can free yourself. You don't need to go to church. You don't need God in your life. God needs you. You don't need God. See? So, the worst enemy in our community, you know who it is? Huh? Preacher. The minister. Reverend C.T. Chicken Wing. He's the one, he's the worst culprit in our community. Why? Because he keeps encouraging us to go and bow down to a dead white man on the cross. Every opportunity that he can get. Is that true? Okay, so therefore, that's our enemy.
When you say, through God all things are possible, that's when things get vague, get broad. Correct. You understand what I'm saying? Unapproachable. And although these are cliches that we use to get by in everyday life, these cliches diminish things because they diminish the human ability to tap into the universe, the omniverse, or whatever you call God. You are actually cut off from it. Just by giving all the power over to a deity outside of yourself. When the only bridge to the deity is through yourself. And if the deity is the one that has all the power, the omnipotent God, well, why the hell he fucking around with you and blaming you for stuff down here that's going to chastise you from stuff when he got all the power in the first place?
My focus, no disrespect to my brothers on the other continent, my focus is right here where I'm at. I'm in North America. Been here. This man has been putting his foot in our ass religiously. And he ain't stopping. The reason why he ain't stopping because none of you want him to stop. As long as you get your car and your home and your money and your family is all right, you ain't worrying about it. But I got a news flash for you. It ain't about you or your family. This is about a nation. And if the black man gets eliminated, the planet will self-destruct. This is yours. It was given to you by the supreme architect. Y'all want to give the credit to the aliens, the extraterrestrials. You want to go backwards in time. You want to act like you don't want to be the black man in America that you are because he's an ex-slave and he in the worst condition. Of course he is. But he the only one still inventing. In his worst condition, he has invented every object that y'all play with. Your cell phone, your traffic light, your cars, your wit. He is the only one still doing this today.
According to Dr. Ben, the original name of Africa was Alkebulan. Africa, the whole continent, was also called Ethiopia. As a matter of fact, the Atlantic Ocean was called the Ethiopian Sea. So there were several different names. Africa was really described by different tribes. It wasn't a whole monolithic society. But eventually, they named Africa after a European.
Africa was not called Africa. It's actually named after the one who actually conquered the Carthaginian Scipio Africanus. So they usually, the Roman types of system is that the conquering general gets to name the region he conquered.
And simultaneously during the Pyramid Age, there are great things happening in West Africa. But we very seldom. There are nations known as Dartichet. Dartichet is now, would geographically presently be located where Ghana is. We had the Nak culture, which is where we today would call Nigeria.
Don't believe nothing I've got to say.
One of the worst things about us is that we've become believers instead of knowers. Check that information out for its validity, me or anybody else. Otherwise, you're doing a disservice to your own consciousness.